Thank you, Janet. On this past Tuesday night, it was about 11 o'clock. Caroline and I were in the den. The TV was on, and at some point I had drifted off and was effectively in a coma when Caroline roused me to say it's time to go to bed. We got up, we head to our bedroom. Caroline is in the bathroom and she's brushing her teeth, and I began to look for my sleeping shorts. I have a sleeping uniform. It's very simple. It's a t-shirt and a pair of exercise pants. I wouldn't want to use them for anything crazy like exercise, so I use them to sleep in. It makes me feel more comfortable just knowing that I've got a pair of exercise pants. Anyway, I began to look for them, and I look in the drawers, they're not in the drawers. I look on top of the dresser, they're not there. I look under the edge of the bed, and I don't see them there on the floor, and I just want to be able to go to bed. I'm really, really sleepy. I'm just ready to get in the bed, but I can't find my shorts. And so finally I asked Caroline, have you seen my shorts? And she says, I think that they're in the dryer. I said, well, they had just been washed. She said, well, you left them laying in the floor. I didn't leave them laying in the floor. I placed them on the floor this morning. It's very different. They're at the edge of the bed, kind of out of the way. Well, neither of us got mad at all about this. There was no anger spawning because of this. But suppose it had a bit of a different ending. Suppose in my sleepiness and desire to get into the bed, I'm looking for my shorts and I cannot find them. And so again, I ask Caroline, have you seen them? And she says they're in the dryer. And I say, well, there's no need for them to be in the dryer. They weren't dirty. Well, you left them in the floor. Well, I know they were right there at the edge of the bed, there at the floor. They weren't in anybody's way. They weren't in my way or your way or anybody's way. Nobody was going to trip or stumble or anything. And here I am ready to go to bed, and I've got nothing I can be able to put on. Now, suppose that had happened. How do you think Caroline would have responded? I would say not too well. She said, well, wait a minute. You didn't pick them up. I did. You didn't put them in the wash. I did. You didn't put them in the dryer. I did. I did all of that as an act of graciousness because I thought I was helping you. But none of this mess would have ever happened if you'd just not been so lazy and not put them on the floor in the first place. Very easily, I can imagine, or you can imagine, that type of scenario unfolding where I could get mad, and as I express that to her, she then gets mad at me. That type of thing happens all the time in relationships, doesn't it? It happens in marital relationships. It happens in workplace, office-type environment relationships. It happens among friends where something aggravates or ticks one person off, and as they're expressing that to the other person that has made them mad, that person in turn gets mad back. This anger becomes a two-way street. In many ways, not only is that true in our regular relationships, ordinary relationships with people, it's also true for us in our relationship with the Lord, that we can experience anger running in both directions where it becomes very much a two-way street. I want you to see an example with me this morning today of that in Matthew chapter 21. Matthew chapter 21, we're actually concluding today a series that I began a number of weeks ago that I've called Mad at Jesus. And we've been looking at individuals in the New Testament who for various and different reasons get mad at Jesus. And looking to see if we might be able to see our own behaviors and our own attitudes in some of those circumstances. But look with me today in Matthew chapter 21, and we're going to start reading with verse 12. Matthew chapter 21, verse 12, we're told, then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple and saying, Hosanna to the Son of David, they were angry. They were angry. You see, anger is going in both directions. Jesus gets mad at them, and they get mad at Jesus. Well, what's all this got to do with us? Well, let's kind of understand, first of all, what's going on. You may very well be familiar with what we find here in this passage. Oftentimes we refer to it as Jesus cleansing the temple. You might have heard this in Sunday school before, or some other sermon at some point in history. And as you read this, you're like, wait a minute, I thought Jesus made a whip of cords and like cracking a whip and getting these jokers out of the temple. Well, where is that? Well, that's actually in John chapter 2. And that passage is different from this one because there are actually two separate and distinct instances where Jesus cleanses the temple. The first that we read about is in John chapter 2, and that's at the very beginning of Jesus' earthly life and ministry. And he has gone in the temple, and he has an episode similar to what we see occurring here. What we find in Matthew 21, though, it serves as the bookend to Jesus' ministry because this is occurring during the final week of Jesus' earthly life and ministry. In fact, it occurs on what we know as Palm Sunday. You remember that Jesus has come into Jerusalem, and as he makes his way into the city, people are insanely excited and happy and thrilled that Jesus has come. And so they are out in the streets waving palm branches. And you recall they were shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And there is this procession as Jesus is making his way into the city. It seems, based on context, that the procession ends at the temple. And Jesus goes into this sprawling temple complex. Now, within the temple complex, there were places that were reserved, one in particular for just the high priest, and then another more outer area for the priests, and then one where just men could go, and then one where women and men could go. And then there was this most outer court that was referred to as the court of Gentiles. Men, women, boys and girls, Jew or Gentile, could be found in this most outer ring of the temple complex. And this is a place that, because of a man named Annas, who was the high priest, this had effectively become a religious marketplace. And Annas was a corrupt, awful, despicable man. And what he was doing is that he was charging merchants and businessmen for the right to be able to set up their booths, their stands, their businesses there in this court of the Gentiles. In fact, this is an area that became known as the Bazaar of Annas. And so they were paying him for the right to be able to sell their goods there. And many of them were actually not only having to do that, but also giving him a share, a cut of the profits. And so he's lining his own pockets based on this business, this enterprise that's being set up there in the temple complex. Now, among the things that were being sold there, first of all, were animals, specifically animals to be used in sacrifices. And it makes sense that these could be found in the temple because many Jews were traveling great and significant distances to get to the temple in the first place. And if you've got to travel a long way, you don't want to have to take an animal that you're going to be sacrificing and try to find places to get this animal water or have to carry or lug significant amounts of food. And so these jokers present themselves, hey, you don't have to do that. You can just buy it here. But once you get there, their prices were insanely exorbitant. You ever been to an event, for example, at the Greensboro Coliseum? You want a hot dog and a Coke, it's going to cost you what? $37, right? Because where else are you going to get it? They've got you over a barrel. And that's exactly what was going on here in this court of the Gentiles. You want a dove, you want a calf, you want a ram. Here, we'll sell it to you, but insanely exorbitant prices, taking advantage of these people that had come to worship and to sacrifice to God. But not only were they present, so too were money changers. Well, why were there money changers there? Well, the reason for that goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 30. And in Exodus chapter 30, you read that the faithful of God, when they went to the sanctuary of God, were to offer to the Lord a tribute of a half shekel. Well, a shekel was a Jewish coin. Well, they're Jews, no problem, Jewish coin, except for the fact that they are under Roman control and Roman governance, which means that they are operating with Roman coins and Roman currency. So when they get to the temple, they want to offer this half shekel coin to the Lord, but they don't have that. Well, there steps in the money changers. Hey, well, you can trade your Roman coins for these Jewish temple coins, for temple currency. Well, no problem, except for the fact that they were charging insane exchange rates. Yeah, we'll give you like one of these for 10 of your Roman coins. taking advantage of people. And so Jesus has had this amazing, dramatic entrance into the city, making his way to the temple. Crowds are waving palm branches, shouting his name. They are excited to see Jesus. And then he comes into this temple complex and sees this circus going on. People by the hundreds, if not the thousands, being taken advantage of. People lining their pockets on the backs of those who are there for positive goals to worship and to honor and to sacrifice to the Lord. And when Jesus sees this, how does Jesus feel? Well, he is angry. He is furious by this. I mean, for one thing, he has already cleansed this place out once, almost 3 years ago, and now it's still set up. This is still going on. And what does he do? The text tells us that he begins to clear and to cleanse the temple. He overturns their tables. He knocks over their chairs. He casts them out. And then in verse 13, we read that Jesus says something that we know as Isaiah, or comes from what we know as Isaiah chapter 56, where he says, "My house is going to be a house of prayer, but you have distorted it. You have perverted it. You have made it effectively a den of thieves." Jesus is clearly mad. But verse 14 tells us, once the dust settles, blind and lame people came, or they were brought to Jesus. And those who were blind, Jesus gave them sight. Those who were lame and crippled, Jesus made them whole again. Most people there that day were tickled over this. They were exuberant. They celebrated. They were happy. But not everyone was happy, because the end of verse 15 tells us of the chief priests and the scribes, what? They were angry. They were angry. Jesus has gotten mad at them, and then they in turn get mad at Jesus. There is this two-way street of anger. You say, well, that's nice, Michael. That's a wonderful explanation, but what does this have to do with me and the living of my life and the experience of my walk with the Lord? Well, I believe there are a couple of takeaways that are very important for us as we not only wind this series down, but also pay careful attention to this passage. And here's the first thought I want you to leave with today, and that's this. Jesus' anger and mine should be in unison. Jesus' anger and mine should be in unison. Put another way, the things that make Jesus angry ought to make me angry. It's interesting, as you look at this passage, you have Jesus and the religious leadership. They're at the same place at the same time, and both the religious leaders and Jesus are angry. Same time, same place, experiencing the same emotion, but they're experiencing this emotion for very, very different reasons. Well, Jesus is angry because he looks and he sees that people are being taken advantage of because they just want to offer a sacrifice to God. That they didn't have the ability to carry or to lug a calf or bring a ram these dozens or perhaps hundreds of miles, and they just want to purchase this animal, and now somebody's effectively robbing them for the right to do that, or just to be able to offer this half-shekel tribute to God. They're emptying their pockets out. These money changers and these merchants selling these animals, they are so clearly distorting the purposes and the desires and the plans of God. They're taking advantage of God's people, and it's all happening not simply under the watchful eye of, but under the direction of ultimately the high priest. Those supposedly representing the Lord are lining their pockets, taking advantage of God's people. Jesus is furious about this. Well, he's mad, but the religious leaders are also mad. Now, this is something that has been going on for years. For years this has been occurring, and they didn't have any problem with it. On a day-to-day basis, this is how things worked there in the court of the Gentiles. From their perspective, this is a win-win scenario. People need animals, they're able to get it. People need Jewish coins, we provide that for them. And not only do they get what they want, well, we also get a lot of additional income that makes our lives entirely more comfortable. But then Jesus comes in, and he effectively now for the second time pulls the curtain back on their deceitful enterprise, and people know exactly what type of scheme and scam this is. He has undercut the entire day's profits and proceeds. Jesus is mad at what they are doing, and then they get mad at Jesus. They're mad for very different reasons. Jesus is angry because they've distorted what should have been a sacred place and a sacred task. They are mad at Jesus because, well, He's robbing them of personal comfort, personal pleasures, and personal gain. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know exactly when or exactly how it happened, but we have been able to witness this over successive generations, that people, both professing followers of Christ, those inside the faith, and then those outside the faith, have developed this perception. And in their minds, they've conjured up this image of God where He is effectively little more than a benevolent cosmic being who does little more than to dole out warm hugs, friendly advice, and unending encouragement. People have further developed the notion that in addition to that, this warm, benevolent, cosmic being, He has desires and standards that He wants me to live by. There's things that He has said are right and things that He has said are wrong, and He expects me to operate within these boundaries. But on the occasion or the occasions where I don't, this benevolent, cosmic being is just kind of, well, shucks. Just kind of disappointed. Well, I wish they had done differently. I wish they had done what I had asked. I wish they had done what I had said, but they didn't. And in the end, it just kind of turns out okay. Do not misunderstand me at all. The God of the Bible is not simply one who loves, but He, in fact, is the author of, the originator of, the creator of love itself. And He does, yes, encourage and guide. He does those things. But far beyond these descriptives of God, the Bible makes very clear that God is holy. And get this holy God hates sin. The God of the Bible, the God that is real, not the God of persons or individuals' perception, but the real God, the God that exists, the one that made everything, He hates sin. If you don't believe that, you don't have to look any further than Proverbs chapter 6, where in just verse 16, you get 7 sins, just a small list of them, and each of these things we're told God does what? He hates them. Not only does God hate sin, He is very much affected by its occurrence when people commit it. It evokes His wrath. Listen to what 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 9 says. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, but he did not keep what the Lord commanded. The bookends of that verse, the beginning and the end, tell you everything that you need to know. The Lord was angry with Solomon. Why? Because he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Not only does God hate sin, it generates anger in the heart of God when you or I or anyone commits it. I want you to understand that God is not simply disappointed when people disobey Him. He is not just disappointed and let down when people sin against Him. It is a personal act, a personal affront to Him, and it angers Him for this reason. My sin and yours does not happen accidentally. We just don't, that just kind of happened. We don't just kind of stumble into it. You and I operate, whether a person is inside the faith or outside, at the very least we operate, first of all, Romans tells us that the law of God is written on our hearts, that we come into this world knowing, even in the most basic standards, things that God has decided are right and those that are wrong. And when we face temptation and we yield to it, we're saying, yeah, I know that that's right, but I'm going to do it my way. I know that's wrong, but I still want to do it. In clear violation of what God has made so abundantly clear. How then do you think, and it's illogical to think that God would respond otherwise. God is not just cheapers. Oh, man. He's not like that. God is angered by this. It evokes His wrath. Because He hates sin, it angers Him when I decide or you decide that we're going to violate His standards. Now this realization that my sin or yours evokes the anger, the wrath of God, ought to do a couple of things. The first thing that it should do is impact our lives and our choices on a day-to-day basis. Because you and I, on a regular basis, daily basis, are going to be encountering circumstances where we are having to make a decision, wrestling with temptation. Am I going to do this or am I not? If you know that there is a real God in heaven that really hates sin and is really angered by it, as you are weighing and wrestling and struggling with that temptation, think this. If I fail in this, if I stumble in this, this is going to make the God who made everything angry, very angry. And I don't want to be in that place. I don't want to be the object of His wrath. I don't want to be doing things that make the God of the universe mad. So I'm going to make a different choice. The second thing that it ought to do is this. You and I, on a regular basis, hopefully not daily, but on a regular basis, you and I in the course of living, we get angry, we get upset and ticked off about a varied number of things. You probably recognize that doesn't feel great. We don't love those occasions unless you're demented and have a problem. It doesn't feel good to experience these emotions. We don't love that. One of the things that will help us is to ask ourselves, for you to ask yourself this question. All right, I'm angry about this, but is He angry over this? Let me paint the picture for you this way. Caroline and I have been married now for 11 years, and 11 years of marriage have taught me an awful lot about Caroline. But candidly, I've learned more about myself in 11 years of marriage than I've even learned about Caroline. You may say the same yourself. It's amazing what marriage teaches you about yourself. One of the things that I have discovered that I did not know until I got married was that I am more prone to get angry over circumstances than with people. I'm more prone to get angry over circumstances than with people. And so, for example, when things aren't going how I want, how I desire them, or how I had anticipated them to unfold, I get ticked. I really do. Let's say, for example, it's during the week and I'm trying to get to Friendly Center. And so I'm going to go from this side of town down to Wendover. I'm going to take the Friendly Avenue exit. I need to make a left turn to get over to the shopping center. Well, at 5:30 in the afternoon, there's a lot of cars out on Wendover, and there's a lot of people that wind up taking that exit. If you have gone that route before, then you're also aware that when you take the ramp off of Wendover, there is just one left turn lane. And at 5:30 in the afternoon, there's about 20 cars stacked up there. You might have experienced that. And so let's say there's time constraints. I've got to get there. I've got to get something. I've got to get back to this side of town. I don't have time to waste. And so I take the exit. I pull off, and there's 20 cars waiting to turn left. All right, so that kind of aggravates me. But then I wait for the light to turn green. So we've got a green arrow, 1 car, 2 car, 3 car, yellow. What? And then another car, 4 cars? Are you kidding me? I'm going to sit here for 5 light cycles of this just to make a left turn? I'm the only one that has that problem. I began to start thinking things like, why didn't the city DMV get out there? Somebody needs to adjust these timers. This light needs to hold longer. Well, they're building all these other roads. Why don't they add an additional turn lane in here so a few more cars can get through? What's the deal with Slowpoke up there? The light's been green for all of a second and a half, and he still has his foot on the brake. What's the matter with him? Is your leg broke? I get so aggravated and frustrated. But honestly, this particular lesson has helped me. And I can't say that I'm perfect in this yet. I'm working towards this. I've made some great strides because I ask myself this. As I'm experiencing anger over whatever it is, I ask myself, is God mad about this? Is the Lord even remotely aggravated that this light is not holding any longer than it is? Is the Lord at all upset that there is only one left turn lane from Wendover on to Friendly? Nope. well, if he's not angry, if he's not upset, if he's not tore out of frame, why in the world should I be? What I'm trying to say to you again is this. Jesus' anger and mine ought to be in unison. And there are things that make him angry, and those ought to be the things, and quite frankly, the things alone that make me angry. But there's a parallel thought to this that leads us to the second layer of application, which is this. Jesus' joy and mine should be in unison. Jesus' joy and mine should be in unison. Put another way, what pleases him ought to bring joy and pleasure to me. Jesus has, in this passage, he's turned the tables over, he's flipped the chairs up, he's run all of these charlatans out of the temple complex. He's told them that they've distorted and damaged this place of God. They've made it a den of thieves. After the dust settles, blind people, perhaps some that had never ever once seen the light of day, perhaps others had experienced disease that had robbed their sight, they're brought to Jesus and he gives them the ability to see, takes them from darkness into light. People who perhaps some had been lame since birth, maybe some had had injuries, or perhaps had been affected by disease to the point where their mobility was completely diminished. And Jesus restores to them the ability to just walk around and move normally. In verse 15, we're told that Matthew describes what Jesus does as wonderful. It's wonderful what Jesus did. Not only the cleansing of the temple, but meeting the needs of these people. And it seems that the majority of those who were there observing and witnessing all of this, they're delighted as well. In fact, Matthew tells us that people were crying out in the temple saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David." They are praising Jesus. It's wonderful what you have done. Not only have you pulled the curtain back on these people that have been robbing from us, effectively extorting us, but these people who are blind and those who are lame, you've healed them. It's just wonderful what you have done. They are pleased. You got to think Jesus is pleased, not only in righting the wrong that was occurring there in the temple complex, but people who had real and legitimate physical needs. Jesus has met those needs. So Jesus is pleased. The crowds seem to be pleased, but not everyone is happy. Why? Because we're told in verse 15 that the chief priests and scribes, they see all of this. And the bookend of that statement says they were angry. They were angry. What we've just covered, I really believe with all of my heart, and that is that it's not that God never wants you or me to experience or to feel anger. Rather, it is that when you and I do, that it ought to be the same things that evoke anger and wrath in His heart. That my anger and His ought to be in unison. As much as I believe that to be true, I believe its opposite to also be true. That what brings Him pleasure and joy ought to bring me pleasure and joy. Why? Because that's how real and loving relationships actually work. If you don't understand it that way, perhaps think of it in this manner. Catherine, our daughter, is 3. She'll be 4 in January. And probably what is her favorite show is a little cartoon called Max and Ruby. Max and Ruby is about 2 little bunnies that are brother and sister. Ruby is older than Max. Ruby is the more responsible of the siblings. Max is mischievous, and he's always creating messes and trouble that Ruby has to fix and clear up. One of the things that's puzzling to me is that Max and Ruby they go to school and they have teachers that you see. They have a grandmother that shows up every once in a while, but never do Max and Ruby, their parents are completely absent. They're never mentioned. They're not in the home. I have no idea where they are. I'm a little troubled by that, but Catherine isn't. Max and Ruby don't seem to be bothered by it as well. But Catherine loves Max and Ruby. And she'll bring you the remote and say, "Max and Ruby?" And she loves this show. I'll be honest with you. In the scheme of things, Max and Ruby is not a show that I love. In fact, were it not for Catherine, I wouldn't be watching Max and Ruby. Were it not for being a parent, I feel very confident that I could say with a clear conscience, Max and Ruby would never ever grace my TV screen. Those are entirely true statements, but so too is this one. Not only do I watch on a daily basis at least one Max and Ruby episode, I do so gladly and willingly. Do you know why? Because I've got a little girl that I love from the depths of my heart that is thrilled, delighted, and pleased with Max and Ruby. And seeing her delighted, thrilled, and pleased delights, thrills, and pleases me. You know what that's like, especially those of you who have been down the road of parenting. You understand that. Why is it that it works this way? Why is this true? It's because of this fact, and I want you to get this. What brings you and me the greatest joys, and what evokes in us the greatest wrath, is inextricably linked to what matters most to us. Get that. Whatever brings you the greatest joy and what evokes from you the greatest wrath is inextricably linked to what matters most to you. Why do I watch that show? Because my children's joy and pleasure matters to me more than me being able to watch something that I would like to watch. With that thought in mind, why is it that the religious leaders, why are they ticked at Jesus? Because their anger and their joy is inextricably linked to what mattered most to them. Me. My own money, my own comfort, my advancing in my own little personal enterprise. And Jesus has come in and He's upset the apple cart. He's taken money out of my pocket by pulling back the curtain on what it is that we're doing. He's cost us this entire day's wages, if not, in fact, jeopardized our future business enterprise. Many of you are familiar with and can recite and maybe even have printed on a plaque in the wall of your home Romans 8:28. While that's true and you're familiar with that, you may also have regularly overlooked the very next verse, what Paul says immediately after that. And that's where God says, or Paul says, for those whom He, that's God, foreknew. Those whom He foreknew, those are believers, that's Christians, followers of Christ. He predestined, which is to say He determined beforehand that they should be conformed to the image of His Son. So put that thought together. The predetermined plan of God is that those who are His followers over time become increasingly like Jesus. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, among the things I believe that means is this. What He hates, I hate. What He loves, I love. What causes Him anger causes me anger. What brings Him joy and pleasure brings me joy and pleasure. That type of correlation is, in truth, not a rare commodity. You can see it on any regular basis, but it's only found in the context of when you find one individual who genuinely and deeply loves another. For weeks we've been looking at people who for various reasons got mad at Jesus. Perhaps over these weeks and looking at these various passages to differing degrees, you've been able to see yourself in some of these circumstances. What I want you to understand, though, as we bring all this together, is that God is going to do what He's going to do, whether you like it or not. God is going to do what He's going to do, whether that makes you mad or not. But understand that your anger is not His goal. That's not His purpose. His goal is that you love Him to the degree that you pursue becoming like Him. And along the way, you stop getting mad at Him because you become just plain mad about Him. Will you bow your heads with me? As your heads are bowed, let me ask you a few questions. You and I, in truth,